Kia ora, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the Alicia Mackay Show on today, Friday, the 18th of November. Before we go any further, it is worth saying a huge happy birthday to producer Cameron Fink, who is currently out of the country, but has turned the grand old age of insert age here today. So happy birthday to Cam, enjoying his time in South Australia. Well, it is a delight to be here with you again this morning. And the most recent reflection that I bring to you coming online this morning is just like, I just quickly need to get this off my chest, but I sold my soul last night and I've started to make, I didn't sell my soul. I rented my soul for a nominal sum for a few hours. And I'm just kind of making my peace with that now. But about a year and a half ago, I booked a gig to go and present. And it was supposed to be in a couple of months at the time. And then, COVID, blah, blah, blah. And so the event got canned and it finally happened last night. And I hadn't really given it much thought. I remember booking it at the time and going, oh, okay, it's an MC gig. I've got to just go and spice the room up and it'll be a nice dinner and people have a good time. That's cool, whatever. And then it wasn't until yesterday, because I am a bit of a last minute preparer, that I started to look at what I was doing and the industry that I was going to work in. And I was like, not sure if it's going to be my kind of room, but that's cool. I'll go in and do my best. And so, I painted a second face on top of my existing face, as is the convention if you are a woman about to take the stage at an event. I painted the face on. Put my glad rags on and turned up at this event. And it was a really big event. There was maybe 400 people in the room. And it was celebrating the success of New Zealand's largest industry that employs almost 1 in 10 New Zealanders. And what I would consider to be a controversial industry in terms of some of the compromises that are made for community good and the amount of profit that sits in the pockets of developers and agents and investors and other big hitters in this industry. And so I thought, well, maybe all right, I feel a little bit ethically dubious about supporting this, but that's okay. I've got a job to do. I'm going to come in and do it. Maybe it won't be so bad. And it was just like every potential bias I had about what that room would be like. It was black tie. There was very free-flowing drinks happening. It was held in a space where it required really fast transformation. So the whole event, tables, stages, everything was set up in just a couple of hours. And there was a huge amount of staff present. They were serving top quality food, making sure that all the tables in the space looked amazing. And the vibe in the room, I'm going to try and describe it. It just kind of smelled like privilege, just kind of reeked of it, right? And there's a certain kind of vibe that happens when you put a lot of that in the same place, which I don't necessarily think is representative of each of the individuals that's involved. But as a collective, they start to move as just this kind of entitled swarm of something. And so when it comes to, hi, everyone, it's time to take your seats, you're completely ignored for quite a long period of time until you talk to them all basically individually. When it comes to the staff serving or operating behind the scenes, they're either completely ignored by the collective attendees or just kind of perfunctorily condescended to. I took the stage and was doing the, wow, welcome everybody, here's the stuff we're going to do, and was just kind of, I don't know, regarded with a sense of mild bemusement and perhaps a smirk. And it just felt yuck. Like it was just a room that was celebrating excess in a way that it's not for me. And so I did my job, and I'm hoping that I did quite a good job, but I was just really clear when I left the event last night that it is no longer going to, I'm never going to put myself in a situation again where I have to stand on stage and say words I don't believe in, right? Where I have to hype up the success of a group of people or an industry that doesn't always align with my values. I'm not going to do that again. It's not worth it. I recently made quite a big pronouncement on LinkedIn about refusing to coach corporate executive teams anymore, because I didn't think that jived with my values for a bunch of reasons. And I think I'm drawing the line there. So I love taking the stage. I love getting behind causes I support and being there as part of that journey. But I cannot just be a face and a body for rent. I felt gross. And then I came home and donated to the Wellington Women's Homeless Trust a good chunk of my speaking fee as a way to just kind of alleviate my conscience. So there we go. The theme of this week's episode is about putting your money where your mouth is. And I think what my experience was in that particular situation was to not take money rather than to put money, but definitely putting my money where my mouth is. Lesson. So I've learned my lesson and I won't be playing that way anymore. So very curious for those of you who are streaming in and tuning in from home on the live broadcast, whether you have any thoughts on putting your money where your mouth is and living your values, even if there's a financial penalty involved, because that is absolutely going to be what I want to talk about this week. So I'm going to start by moving you back 2 weeks backwards in the news cycle, which in news is, to be clear, quite a long time. But, you know, I was out of the country for a bit and I've been letting this gestate. So you'll have to forgive me for my late elevation of this topic. And actually, it's also worth saying that I didn't even follow this in the news because I was out of the country at the time. And it was my not an MBA students who brought this particular quandary to my attention when I got back. But the story a couple of weeks ago that you might remember if you're in New Zealand that hit the news was around a charitable donation, or rather an unsuccessful charitable donation to the Starship Foundation, who obviously run the Starship Children's Hospital. And it hit the media that basically what had happened was a guy named Mark Chittick had quite a significant win on his horse at a race in Sydney. And so he'd rung Starship and said, basically, I would like to give you $500,000, or it was about the equivalent of, they're saying about 570,000 New Zealand dollars. And he said, I've had this big win. I want to give you guys some money. I'm really into supporting the work that you do. I think it's really important. Do you want to take my money? And about an hour later, they rang him back and politely declined and said, really appreciate the sentiment. Thank you. But we don't take money that's associated with racing or gambling. That's not in our donations policy. So thanks. But that's the end of it. Now, that could have been the end of it. But it wasn't the end of it because it got into the news pretty quickly, which I feel a little bit dubious about. That was very quickly taken to the media, but okay. So then a short time later, like not long later after all, they turned around and blamed it, the fact that they'd declined the donation. So they made a public statement and said, oh, look, I hear that Mark Chittick is saying that it was because it was gambling proceeds that we turned it down. No, it was actually because we had a really short time to make the decision. So we only had a couple of hours that afternoon to make that decision. And, you know, we have to do a certain level of due diligence when it comes to donations of a significant amount. And given that this was coming from overseas and a couple of other complications, we couldn't make the decision in that time. So that's why we turned it down. So they immediately backtracked from that specific statement, and then sort of came back to add more fuel to the fire a little bit later and said, oh, and by the way, it's not the racing thing. So we totally take money from gambling and horse racing. We've done that before. So it wasn't actually an ethical thing. And then, of course, in the way that these things work, once you start playing out conversations and making up arguments in real time in a public space, we had other people come forward with their stories about having their donations rejected on the basis of being proceeds from gambling and from horse racing specifically. Now, I thought this was a really interesting conversation to be playing out in the media for a lot of reasons. And everyone had a take on it. My instinctive take when I heard about this was, well, this is brilliant. How good. So one of our most prolific and visible charitable organisations in New Zealand is taking a really values-led stance on where they'll take their money from and what it represents for them. And clearly they have formed a view about the social and community harms of gambling. And I don't endeavour to guess what that ethical position looks like. It might have had as much to do with animal treatment as it did with community harm. I couldn't speak on their behalf. But my first instinct was pride. I thought, that's great. That must have been really hard to do. And the fact that that values-based position was so clear that a junior staff member felt empowered to make that call on Starship's behalf, because that's part of what's happened. Starship came out and said, "Oh, look, if it had come up the decision-making chain, we would have made an exception." But this silly little junior staffer thought that the values we pronounced were clear-cut, but they thought it was black and white. But don't worry, if there's enough money involved, we will absolutely sell ourselves, which is just gross, right? And so there was this real clear opportunity for Starship to own that decision and potentially to make a really important statement about how we fund critical community services, for example. So they could have come out and said, look, the fact that we were in a position of needing to rely potentially on gambling in order to provide critical children's healthcare is something that this country needs to talk about, right? They could have done that. They could have come out and made a statement and said, absolutely, we turn this down. And we turn this down because we're not comfortable with what the horse racing industry and gambling more broadly represents in our community. And these are the harms that it does. And we're a do-good organisation, not a profit from harm one. So let's talk about that. Right? There was a real opportunity there to take a stance that really supported a clear values-based position, potentially changed the way people in the public think. Right? Because most of us don't think about ethical issues all day long. I probably do more than the average bear because I live in the clouds, but most of us are just like doing our work and cooking dinner and vacuuming and not really thinking about the broader social impact of gambling and horse racing and the potential harms for animal rights. We're probably not thinking about it much. And having that crop up in the news could have been a really useful conversation starter that changed the way people think. But no, it was none of those things. It ended up being this messy, administrative, back and forth thing where there was a little bit more leaked out every day that, from my perspective, completely undermined both the credibility and honesty and integrity of the Starship Foundation for their constant back and forth, and really diluted the potential stance that they could have taken on this. But it actually got worse from there. So then we had the Cure Kids CEO, Francis Benj, weigh in. So obviously Cure Kids is a charity that works in the space of children's cancer, and did this really kind of pick-me media interview and said, we would have taken the money. Nice. So she makes some big statement in a media interview that the potential good that could have been done for children outweighed the reputational risk associated with taking that money. And I just was sort of not agape, but maybe like mildly agape, thinking, I think you've missed the point. Like, reputation is an outcome of decisions that we make. The reputation, if what we're concerned about when we take money is the reputational risk or the PR implications of taking money that wasn't ethically produced by our organisational values, it's not a reputation issue, right? It's an integrity issue, it's a values issue, it's a harm issue. And I just felt quite dirty about the whole thing and just actually thought it was really gross to have this kind of pick-me behaviour playing out with other charities weighing and going, we would have had your money, any gambling you want, we'll take it. So that was a story that I have spent quite a bit of time thinking about since it came into my orbit. And just what happens when we don't have the mettle to own those choices publicly, and what a lost opportunity that was for a really useful conversation that could have had real community benefit. And the fact that we got all kind of messed up in this administrative bureaucratic tangled mess is a real shame. It's actually just a testament to how fraught these environments become. So that's my take on the Starship Foundation debacle. And then, of course, this week, the biggest news in New Zealand has been the Black Ferns taking out their 6th world title with their World Cup win in Eden Park. last weekend to a sold-out crowd of over 42,000 people, and what an absolute victory that was. But it is worth saying it is their 6th world title. It is not new for them being world champions. It's just that we are starting to pay them their rightful attention and laud them as they deserve. Now, it's also worth saying that the other New Zealand sports teams who have received that level of international consistent success are the Black Sox, the men's softball team, who have also won 6 world titles, and the Silver Ferns, who have also won 5 world titles and are in the running potentially for a 6th next year. So what an absolute triumph on so many levels for women's rugby, for women's sport in New Zealand. And to my utter delight, the focus of the conversation in the public sphere, MPs are weighing in. It was the first thing that Mark Robinson, the New Zealand Rugby Chief Executive, was asked about on the radio on Monday morning. It's been about pay parity. We want to know why these women are not being paid what they deserve, because all of the tired arguments that have been rolled out over the years for why we can't pay, or we can't pay well, or we can't pay bonuses have been these circular, patriarchal, crappy arguments about, oh, well, they don't they don't attract the same audiences, and so they don't deliver the same commercial return, and so we can't pay them as much. Oh, hands are tied, don't know what happened. Like, I have no idea why men's rugby remains the only important thing, despite the fact that we give it all of our attention and investment. Hands are tied, can't do anything about it. And so this time around, we were like, well, I'm not a we, but Sport New Zealand, Black Ferns, and women's rugby supporters inside NZ Rugby went, actually, that's probably a load of shit. Like, what if we really got out there and pushed this? And it wasn't an instant thing. It wasn't like, oh, we've decided for this World Cup, we're really going to push the message. This has been a slowly building conversation for years, where Black Ferns advocates and women's rugby advocates inside NZ Rugby have pushed consistently, little win after little win after little win, in terms of pay and recognition and support, right? So this has been happening over a long period of time, which is always what happens in these fights for equality. And it isn't until there's some kind of inflection point or breakthrough moment that it really hits the public consciousness in a sustained way. So I do want to make the point that while this is a very newsworthy and current conversation that's playing out in New Zealand, this is not a new conversation by any stretch, and there has been tireless, consistent effort that has been poured in to trying to achieve recognition and pay parity for women athletes in New Zealand for a long, long time, and that this is an inflection point that has been made possible by that history. So I just want to be really clear about that, because I think it's easy to get swept up in what's new and what's current and think, wow, this is a new conversation, and now it's time for a big leap forward. And that's actually not how these things tend to play out. But anyway, this year, Black Ferns are like, we're really not gonna lie down and take that shit. You reckon we can't sell a stadium out? Watch this. And so they did sell out Eden Park, and not just once, but twice. And not only did they achieve that, the quality and the unique character of the event. So we've got the 42,000 people in Eden Park. We've got 1.3 million people tuning in from home. Like, these are big numbers. And they were like, we're not just going to do this the same as every other sporting event. We're going to make this our own. And there were waiata, and there was poi, and there was family joy, and there were performances, and there was connection. And it was just an absolutely stunning event that, honestly, I'm sad I wasn't there. I'm genuinely sad I wasn't there. It was absolutely stunning. And so they did that. They pulled it off. They sold out the stadiums. They did it their way. And rightly were extremely triumphant about it. And so what happens on Monday morning when we get Mark Robinson on Radio New Zealand for an interview about pay parity, where obviously one of the first questions that gets asked is, well, and the recognition of this incredible triumph of both marketing and sporting performance, is NZ Rugby going to come to the party? What is the plan for improving pay parity? Because the women athletes who play for the Black Ferns are paid a retainer of between $35,000 and $70,000 a year, and at most can earn about $130K. Now, if you compare that to All Black salaries, the men's rugby team, national rugby team for New Zealand, some of them are earning over $1 million. And if they win the World Cup, they get an instant $150,000 bonus each. No such bonus has been provided for or promised to the Black Ferns. So it's just blatant inequality, right? It's just absolutely blatant sexism. And so Mark Robbins says, and I quote on the radio in the morning, it would be nice to do something. It would be nice to do something. Wouldn't that be nice for the wee ladies running around out there? It'd be nice to do something, as if it's completely out of his hands, right? Like just chucking his hands. It'd be nice to do something. We might sort through that in the next few days, he says. And so when pressed on what the timeline was for advancing pay parity in New Zealand rugby, he just had so little to say. And similar to my take on the public fronting from Starship Foundation over the donation that they rejected, this was an opportunity for New Zealand rugby to put aside the kind of fluffing and maybe this, sort through it would be nice sort of shit that they've been rolling out for years, and come out and make a really awesome, clear statement on the Monday morning and go, we have been shit. You know what? Women's rugby deserves more than we have given it, right? Deserves more recognition, deserves more investment, and these women deserve to be paid better. So while we cannot confirm contractual details with you yet, we are publicly committing right now to paying these incredible athletes a bonus and to improving pay parity over the next 12 months. They could have said that. They could have said that and the whole bloody country would have rejoiced and got behind them, right? Celebrated this as the victory that it deserved. There was a choice they could have made, right, to put their money where their mouth was and really get New Zealanders behind them, and everybody would have won, right? It just would have kept those positive vibes flowing. But no, instead they got on the radio and just tried to fudge details and not commit to anything. They still haven't committed to anything. And it's now at the point where in the last day or two, we've actually got the Prime Minister and a bunch of ministers who are publicly making statements saying, we think New Zealand rugby should be paying these women a bonus and should be moving towards pay parity with male athletes. It needs to happen. And rightly so. But the fact that that's coming in from the government, there was just such an opportunity there, New Zealand rugby. And there are just so many things that make me angry about this. And I'm not being original by bringing up this topic. You know, this is a hot topic in the media at the moment, and rightly so. It just brings me great joy to see this actually breaking through the public consciousness, because on the one hand, it's like, how much harder do we have to work as women? How much better do we have to be than average to get basic recognition? Not even equality, just basic recognition. We should be absolutely ashamed of ourselves that kind of patriarchy still takes place in such a public sphere. But all of these conversations around return and branding and the audiences they bring in is so ignorant, because they're conversations that are led by men who know absolutely how investment and return on investment works, as though the historical underinvestment or complete ignorance for women's sporting codes has had nothing to do with the lack of attention that women's sport has received on a national or a global stage. I mean, it's just so blatantly, obviously stupid that it's actually a surprise that those arguments are still being trotted out. And you've got your Mike Hoskins, who for years have been going, oh, they don't sell the merch and they don't sell the tickets, so you just can't pay these women, as though that's some kind of magical thing, that ticket sales and merchandise and branding and sponsorships and partnerships and the work it takes to get behind that and form those sponsorships and sell those tickets and develop that merch and do that PR, as though that stuff doesn't happen, that people don't make decisions about where to put their money and where to put their focus and where to put their attention in that process, as though it's just some kind of like magic fucking situation. It isn't. Those are very intentional choices made over a period of time, over a long period of time, about how money is spent and where investment is made. And then the return on that investment is measured, and it escalates over time. And for women, there has been a historical and current woeful underinvestment in finding those partnerships, getting those ticket sales, doing the promotion, creating the merch, right? Getting behind these women. And so it is not a coincidence at the fact that despite all of that, they've managed to sell out Eden Park twice, put on an incredible show, take out their 6th world title, and to do that while on less than 10% of what some of our All Blacks are on. Like, mate, it is time to get your shit together and put your money where your mouth is, right? So, I mean, I guess that's my theme today, and that's most of it, right? Is that this shitty chicken and egg argument that you see playing out with the Black Ferns is a really clear example of we don't pay them money because they don't make money, but they don't make money because we don't invest any money, right? It's really obvious and it's really silly. But it's obvious to me that values have no strength until they've been tested. So anybody can say that they stand for gender equality or women's sports or community good or community health, but it doesn't mean anything. No value has any value until it has been tested and come out on top, right? So Starship Foundation had their value around not accepting money from gambling or from racing. They had that value tested, and the value came out on top, but then they shrunk back and they hid and they cycled it back and they felt silly about it, and so they didn't own it, right? And that completely diluted the power of that value. Having a value around pay parity or gender equality means nothing until that value is tested, and the test being, are you going to publicly commit to pay parity? Are you going to pay these women more, right? That is the test. If you fail that test, your value fails. It is hollow, right? Good intentions don't mean anything until they have been delivered and operationalized with some kind of sacrifice, right? Because that's the word we don't like to use when we talk about these conversations. It's really easy to have values. It's really easy to talk about what you like and what you think are good things. It is really hard to sacrifice something in the name of those values, right? Don't tell me that your family is the most important thing in the world, but then when you're coming up against a situation where it's choose family or choose dollars or fun, you choose dollars or fun, right? Don't tell me that protecting the community from the harms of gambling is one of your number one values, but then not be prepared to take the sacrifice of potential public criticism for that. Don't tell me that pay parity matters to you, but then not be prepared to sacrifice and redirect, and here's the real conversation, not redirect funds that are currently allocated to somebody else and something else, because this is what it really comes down to. It's not that they don't, in theory, think women should be paid more. It's that to do that inside their current budget would mean shifting money from one column to another. It would be taking investment from men's rugby and channeling that towards women's rugby. And that is what they don't feel comfortable with, right? If the government came in and said, New Zealand rugby, it's really important that we pay women what they deserve, so here's enough money to make that happen, they would do that and pat themselves on the back for it, and it wouldn't mean shit because there was no sacrifice involved in making that value real, right? So what's really at stake here is that we can't have equality without rebalancing. It does require some level of loss. If you've got, and this was a comment on my LinkedIn this week, I think from Harriet Shelton that I just absolutely adored, that said, look, if you've got a leadership team or a board of 10 or 12 people, and 8 of those are men, and you want gender equality in that room, you don't grow the board to be 16 people so that there are 8 women and 8 men, right? You don't do that. If you've got a board of 10 and 8 of them are men, 3 of the men have to go to create space for there to be 5 women. And that's the uncomfortable part of that conversation. But that's what makes a value real, is when something has been sacrificed, right? When we've been willing to put our money where our mouth is, whether that's our time or our energy or our effort or our reputation or the status and privilege of the people who have been enjoying it for such a long time. All right, so whether it's, how do we help alleviate the gender pay gap? We just don't know. Like, should we get a working group? Should we get a consultant? No, you should pay them more immediately. Gender pay gap solved, right? How do we help people in poverty to make better choices? I have no idea how we could possibly help people in poverty to have a sustainable income. I know, give them one. It's actually really simple. If you think that people deserve to have a basic universal income that guarantees them a dignified life and human rights of shelter and access to healthcare and education, why don't we just pay them, right? If we want to know more about how women's bodies work, but we're like, oh, it's so weird. Like at the moment, all of the funding in our medical research goes to men. And if only we could get some more, we could start to work out what's happening in that kind of weird zone where all life is kind of generated. Mystery. I know. Put the money in, pay for it, right? That'll close the data gap. All we have to do is pay for it. And this happens in public spaces. It happens in commercial spaces. And what makes me particularly angry, I'm going to close shortly. What makes me particularly angry is when not only do we, either as a company or as a government or as a charity or as a broader society, is when not only do we not put our money where our mouth is on those values, but we try to get the credit anyway. So it's like, when you go to Cotton On and they're like, we love poor people in developing countries. If you love them, you would buy this tote bag and this drink bottle. Do you want to add money to your purchase for this tote bag and this drink bottle? And you're like, wouldn't it be better if you guys just paid decent wages along an ethical supply chain rather than try and guilt me into buying something extra that I don't need, which surely cannot be helping. And then so you can claim the value of being an ethical company. Like, that doesn't really make sense, does it? Or Southern Cross Health Society is a really good example where they put on a big show for Pride Week, and they actually, the gall of this is actually quite stunning, fundraised publicly for Pride Week. And they were like, we're going to have some staff like running a half marathon, and you can sponsor us and you should donate us money, right, to get behind Pride Week. So good, so good. But they don't fund gender reassignment surgery, right? Their health insurance plans don't support gender diversity. They don't support any health that is involved with mental health. So how can they possibly be fundraising for these things when they don't put their own money where their mouth is? It's yucky. And they get the PR credit of being well-intentioned. It's yuck. It's really gross. So in summary, don't tell me you believe in something if you're not willing to sacrifice anything for it. And when in doubt about how you could live the things that matter as a company, as a society, as a person, as an organisation, but how you can live those values, put your money where your mouth is. All right. And that concludes just over 30 minutes of Alicia Mackay ranting this morning. I deeply appreciate all of you who tuned in for this, and for those of you who are listening at home on your favourite podcast app. This is a conversation that I enjoy having deeply and that I'm happy to have any day of the week. I hope you all get out there and have an excellent weekend, and I will be back with you here next Friday. Ka kite, everyone.